Welcome to our book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are so happy you're here. My name is Megan, and my fabulous co-host is...
Hey, I'm Amanda.
Welcome. So here's the deal, right? We love homeschooling. We love spending time with our respective children, but we never show up on our podcast and be like, oh, my life is perfect in every possible way. And we'll get to that more in just a few minutes. Trust me. I've got some brutal honesty about my book club preparation for today. But you can always count on us for authenticity and a little bit of a mess. So we're so happy you're here. Join us.
Yes. So speaking of keeping it real, we'll flat out tell you that you do not need to read the book to be a part of our book club, right? We show up, we share our thoughts on the book. And if you're folding laundry or shuffling your kids around town, you can just tune in for our Cliff Notes version. Though I will say, listening while shuffling the kids around, you might want earbuds, right? Like every once in a while, we drop some adult language. That's your call. My kid hears plenty of adult language, but if you don't want yours hearing that, just keep that in mind. So for the last few weeks, we have been reading the Homeschool Starter Guide by Dr. Gina Riley. This book claims to teach us how to create and adapt the best education action plan for your needs. So if you would like to catch up on the previous chapters, feel free. They're in our podcast queue. You can read along with us. You can catch up. You can jump in wherever you want. It's all good.
Absolutely. So today we'll be discussing chapters 7, 8, and 9 in theory. We'll be discussing as much of chapter 9 as we can get through without this being like a 3-hour episode. Chapter 9 is unreasonably long. And so it was like one of these things where either we were going to have this problem this week, or if we put it next week, we were still going to have that problem next week. At one point in chapter 9, the author just like completely changed the subject. And I'm like, how'd we get here? Like, what kind of 180 was that? This is a new chapter. This is a new topic. So it's pretty meaty. We'll get as far as we can, and whatever we don't finish, we'll roll over into next week. So it's all good. Since we are your imperfect and messy homeschool mom friends, I'll be the first one to throw myself under the bus today and say Amanda's notes are way more robust this week than mine are. Today's Thursday. On Tuesday, I live in Charleston. We left and went to Atlanta, drove about 4.5 hours to Atlanta. I had some work to do. My kids had some stuff going on. We did that. And our main purpose of the trip was to go hear Jane Goodall speak last night, which was incredible in every possible way. All of us cried. So that was amazing. And then last night that ended around 10ish, and we got in the car and drove the 4.5 hours back. So I crawled into my bed at about 3 a.m. this morning. And yeah. So it's been a day. It was great, and I'm feeling fine and all that, but my book club prep was not quite what it's normally at because I prioritized Jane Goodall over book club prep. But I feel like she's 90, and that was pretty epic, and so I did it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say I did not think mine were going to be that good. So we'll see how this whole episode goes, right? Because normally I do my book club reading during parkour class. I take my kiddo to parkour. I have to wait for him for an hour. So that's when I do my reading and annotating. And this week, one of the fellow parents wanted to talk to me and kept interrupting. And he told me about how he knew a homeschool kid who grew up and became a drug addict. And so you shouldn't homeschool kids. And, like perfect backlash, how to deal with backlash moment. I looked him straight in the face and said, I'm actually pretty sure that way more public school kids become drug addicts than homeschool kids, which he did not take kindly to, actually. And so then he doubled down on, his homophobia and his transphobia and the fact that we need more God in everything, all of life. California is going to hell in a handbasket because we don't have enough God. And I was really like,
that is certainly
I can't believe I'm doing this instead of reading my book for book club. So
that is good times. Hey, if he thinks homeschoolers do more drugs than public school kids, he'd be blown away by private school, because when you put a bunch of really rich kids together, you'd be blown away at how many drugs are there. So definitely, and I would assume it's the same too in public schools that are in really affluent areas. So yeah, it's a lot. I can tell. I went to private school, and we had a lot of resources. We'll just put it that way, right?
Yeah.
So,
there was a time, I grew up in rural Iowa, and there was a time that I hid in my locker while the two people on both sides of me completed a drug deal, right? So but
everywhere.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, probably
sure.
That's in the homeschool community, but it's there. So.
Right. Hey, you want to meet up at the science center and pass some good stuff?
So yes, I'm not terribly prepared, but I did read the book. So I'm giving myself a gold star, and I'm here and I'm awake and I look alive. So having gotten home at 3 a.m., I don't feel so bad about that. So chapter 7 is called Create Your Homeschool Action Plan. And since your notes are far more robust than mine are, do you want to dive in, Amanda?
Sure, I'll kick us off. So just right at the very beginning on page 68, she says, quote, action plans are valuable blueprints that can guide you on your path to success. I personally love to-do lists, and you can think of a homeschool action plan as an expanded homeschooling to-do list. And I was like, initially, I don't know about that. That seems like way more than just a homeschooling to-do list. But I will say that as I read it, right, and as I got worked through the chapter, I can see how this could be helpful. There are two different types, and we'll talk about those two different types. And I do this to some extent. Definitely not quite the same way she does it, but I do some of it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think an action plan could be helpful, especially if you're new or homeschooling in a high regulation state, which our author is. So I like that. My qualm about page 68 was she says, I kept 3 copies of my action plan in different places so I could reference it frequently. This book was written in 2021. Girlfriend, you have a smartphone. Okay. You have Google Docs. There are apps. Why do you have a document? And I mean, she talks about the first one was in her daily planner. The second one was posted above her homeschool workspace. The third one went into a file folder. So here's the thing. If you're like referencing it or checking things off or marking your progress on this to-do list, I would never have all 3 lists synced up ever. Ever. Like one list, girlfriend. Why are you overcomplicating this? Okay.
Yeah.
So that was my thought.
I'll give you 2 lists. Right. So my master list lives in Google Doc. I call it a spreadsheet, but it lives in my Google Docs. And then I do print off, right, like a weekly list from the master list. And at the weekly list actually like gets physical check marks, where the master list just lives there of like all the things that I'm hoping to do. And hopes and dreams, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And then, the weekly one is the one that actually gets filed away with our stuff. But yeah, like the exact same list in 3 places, that's like a recipe for disaster. There's no way. There's no way.
I'd never have them all synced up. There's no way.
All right. So it looks like we have the same page too on the next one.
We went about it slightly differently though, which is not terribly surprising.
Yeah. All right. So on page 70, she dives into what her action plans are, right? So the first one is an action plan for district or state reporting, and it includes mission statement, homeschool method, letter of intent to homeschool, quarterly reporting dates, end of year summary, final assessment due date, and reflection. And so she just breaks it down there, and then she goes into each of those things later. And then she also says then for a subject-based action plan, which she's doing both. You don't have to do both. You don't have to do either. But the subject-based action plan includes subject, goal description or summary of yearly goals, resources to use to achieve those goals, specific learning needs or material needs, objectives or tasks to achieve the goal, plan for progress monitoring, criteria for success, deadline for meeting goals, and reflection.
Woo! Okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to say, if you are listening to that and you're like, oh my gosh, and like if you're contemplating homeschooling and you just listen to that, you're like, I am out. Like,
yeah, never mind. Can't even, never mind.
Okay. Our author lives in New York. All right. The highest regulation states for homeschooling are New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. Okay. Now, I have friends that homeschool in Massachusetts and New York, and both of them are like, it's not nearly as scary as it sounds. Having said that, you couldn't pay me to move to New York, but you need to find a local New York homeschool mom friend who's going to help you figure out how to simplify this and how to make it work. Right. So yeah, do not be scared off by that list. She is literally homeschooling in one of the most difficult states to homeschool. And I think if you do live in one of those high regulation states, it's important to have your ducks in a row, like she's talking about here, right? Like you're going to be accountable to turn stuff in really more frequently and all that good kind of stuff. So it's good advice if you live in one of those states. But if you're listening to this from Florida and you're like, holy shit, no, it's not like that. Don't stress.
Well, yeah. And the other thing I would say is it sounds like a lot, but I would venture to guess that most of us are doing all of these things, just not in a spreadsheet where we're sitting down and actually writing all of this stuff out, right? So, she's like, okay, so it includes subject. All right, well, of course, we're all thinking like, oh, first we're going to do science this year. And, like, I'm thinking we're going to make sure we focus on like anatomy in the human body. Okay, so that's your goal or description of what you're wanting to do this year. We're going to focus on that. And then resources to use. This is where you've decided like, are you going to get a curriculum? Are you just going to do, like we're going to make sure we get to the bodies exhibit and we're going to do this or that, and then the next one is specific learning needs or materials needed. This is where you're like, oh, this curriculum requires that we buy the squishy body and I want to make sure I get it on sale. So I'm going to put that on there to make sure I keep an eye out for when it's on sale, or like, I know that October is free month, kids free at this museum. So I'm going to put that in there so I don't forget that we want to go on this field trip in October, right? So that's specific learning and material needs. The objectives are tasks to achieve. Like that's just, yeah, you can break it down more, but basically I assume that you want your kids to know how the human body works. If you picked anatomy, right? Like that's why you picked it, you thought through it. And if you have something more specific because of some goal of theirs, you've thought about that, right? And then, your plan for progress monitoring. That may or may not be something, right? Some of us might be like, oh, well, the curriculum I have has regular like assessment worksheets and tests that we'll do. Or maybe you envision this thing where your kid provides a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation on the field trip that you went on or whatever. That's all you're putting in there. Criteria for success. What does a successful year look like to you? Like we've all thought about that. And for some people, it's that they actually took a test or they filled out worksheets or they completed it. For some people, it's that they enjoyed learning and you had conversations in the car and that they understood it and comprehended it. And then the deadline for meeting the goals, we all have some idea in mind. No one is like, this year we're going to learn anatomy, but I don't care when we learn it. Maybe they'll come back in their freshman year of college and let me know what they learned about anatomy, right? Like we all have some kind of a goal there. And then the reflection, like as homeschool parents, we're all reflecting. We might not have it in our spreadsheet and we might not type up our reflections, but at the end and sometimes in halfway mark or somewhere in the middle, we're like, holy crap, that did not work. Or like, oh my gosh, this worked so much better than I thought it was going to. We should definitely do more crash course history or more crash course whatever, because that worked really well. That's all that is, right? So you have this really long list and it seems super overwhelming. You're like, oh my God, I would never. But when you actually think through it, you are doing all of those things. And if you choose to put it in a spreadsheet or in a Google Doc or whatever, like by all means, go on with your bad self. If you choose to put it in some kind of a journal or a, teacher lesson plan thing, because that's how you want to organize yourself, by all means, go on with your bad self. If you just keep it in your head, that is also fine. You're still doing all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great way of breaking that down. And we'll talk a little bit more about yearly goals or kind of plans, right? What we plan to do in a year, in a month, in a week, etc. She talks about that a little bit later on as well, and kind of talking about how to set those goals, how to break work down, how to, etc. Right? All of the above.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't have to be as, and I felt like she did that some in this book, right? The way she laid it out initially seemed really overwhelming and like, oh my God, I don't do that. I would never do that. But then if you can get past those first couple pages, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, I do that. Like maybe not that formally or not that organized because I don't need it. But there are people who are that, like they're type A and they need that written down. They need to see it or whatever. But I think for the most part, we're all doing it. So I will say then the next page, page 71, it details how to create a mission statement. And I'm still not sold on needing to create a mission statement. And I'm really not sold on needing to include it in your homeschool action plan.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
If you need to, If that's like, it really makes you feel better, it brings you comfort, by all means, do it,
I,
add it to your life.
I think there's a thing though too about if you feel that you need it versus are you creating busy work for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think there are so many homeschool moms that do that for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
What I have no idea what everybody's individual reason, but don't make that. You do not need to make life harder for yourself than you need to. So
Mm-hmm.
if it's serving a purpose for you, awesome, do it. But if you just feel like you have to for some, like really kind of maybe figure out where that's coming from, because if you're making life harder on yourself, if instead you could be taking that hour that it takes you to perfectly refine and edit that and go to the park with your kids or play board game with your kids, go to the park, right? Like
Yeah. No, I mean, that's that like homeschool backlash thing. Like if you're doing it because you feel like you need to be able to show your parents or your
yeah,
in-laws or even your husband that you put this together, like maybe spend a little bit of time thinking about whether or not you would be better served in the long run creating boundaries instead of creating another Word document.
yes, I love that. It's like,
Um,
yeah. All right. So then you have a note on 74 about action plan examples. Yes, I liked these. I
yeah.
wouldn't do
So
them, but I liked it.
yeah, that's it, right? Like at this point, she goes into actual examples. And so on page 74, there's the one that's meant for school and district, if you have more reporting stuff. And for me, I'm like, I can totally see this one, right? It has the dates. So I think that's quite useful.
Mm-hmm.
Not all, but a lot of states do require certain things be filed at a certain time, right? You have to provide this or you have to provide that. And there are dates that you have to meet. So having that in one place as a reminder so that you can kind of plug and play that each year and just minimize the like, oh crap, when was that? Or like, I'm pretty sure I sent our letter of intent in this year. Like, but let me go search through my email and see if I can find it. Right. Like this, you put down the date that you sent it, you stick a copy of it in there, or attach it on another page. Like, I can see how that just makes life a
Yeah.
little easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for making life easier. So if something like this does, by all means, do it, add it.
Especially if it's fulfilling a requirement, right? If you're
Yeah.
just doing it because you think it's fun to create spreadsheets, again, maybe explore that
Mm-hmm.
feeling of need.
Yeah. And I know like the next one on page 76, it goes into the subject-based action plan example. And there's like, in this example, there's a lot to this and more than I would personally put into writing. But in fairness, I do have a giant spreadsheet that does track all of this and discusses pretty much all of these things, right? Like I do this. And I can see if you were maybe homeschooling more than one kid and you were doing this sort of thing, it might be useful to have it all down so that you can better keep track of this worked for this one and this didn't work for that one, right? If you're in the thick of it and you're using different curriculums and all of this with 3 kids on a bad day, are you really going to remember like, yes, Johnny definitely liked this book from this thing and he loved this documentary, but Susie did not like this documentary. She definitely preferred this other documentary. You're going to be like, I know one of the kids liked it and one of them hated it. And I don't, like, so, I mean, I can see how that might make your life easier.
Yes, I can totally see that. Yeah, because I was just talking to my kids the other day and I was like, one of you had this thing, and I remembered what the thing was. Now I don't remember, and I was like, but I don't remember which one of you it was. It was like something from when they were all toddlers at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I don't know which one of you it was. Like somebody had that thing though. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can
Yeah.
totally see that. That's a very valid point. All right, so that wraps up chapter 7. Before we jump into chapter 8, we would love to invite you to come and join our Facebook community. You can search for us on Facebook. You just put in Homeschool Moms Unfiltered and then hit the little button for groups, and you'll find us. Invite some homeschool mom friends while you're at it. It can be challenging to find community. If you're a secular homeschooler, a progressive homeschooler, especially this year, we're recording this during an election year and it's going to be really awful. So we would love to welcome you to come to our amazing haven where you can find friends and support, and we talk homeschooling and just have some fun and all that good stuff. So come on over and join us. We would love to have you.
Yeah.
So chapter 8 is called Personalize an Action Plan for Your Child's Needs. I loved the opening. It looks like we both made notes for page 80. So the opening for this section says the curricula and state-based standards found in schools are created for groups of same-age students on a similar trajectory of social, emotional, and intellectual growth. For example, a 7th grade curriculum is created for the average 12-year-old without taking into consideration individual interests, strengths, needs, and talents. Parents often pick homeschooling as an alternative because they want to personalize education for their own unique child. In fact, the most wonderful thing about home learning is that it allows parents to give their children an education that matches their individual learning styles. And I feel like this is an awesome reminder because I feel like as the homeschool community grows, and we talked about this last week and the week before in our online learning platform review, the demographic is shifting, right? So before you had, I think, a different motivation behind homeschooling, and it talks a little bit about that in this book as well, that the core motivation for homeschooling for a really long time was religious purposes. And now you have people homeschooling because the public school isn't serving their kids, because their kids are neurodivergent and they're not getting the services they need, because of violence in schools, bullying in schools, all of this stuff, right? And so you have people who are coming into homeschooling who both single parents, where both parents are working. And so the ability to gather around the kitchen table and, create exploding volcanoes and stuff is just doable for some people more so than it is for others based upon the time and the battery that you have available to you, right? So I totally understand that. But at the same time, I feel like, and Amanda, you can tell me what you think, but like, it seems like there's this default to like, I'm going to homeschool. Can someone please tell me the best curriculum, or can someone tell me the best online platform? It's like, that's the default. It's like a straight line, A to B. Like, I'm going to throw them on the computer, or I'm going to get this box and it's going to educate my kids completely. Right. And I'm not saying you need to build your own curriculum or piecemeal everything together and, have this Waldorf scavenging in the forest learning experience necessarily, right? If that's not your jam, or you just flat out can't do that, right? Which is totally fine. You can still provide an amazing homeschooling experience for your kids. But I love the fact that in this section here, it talks about like the fact that you're leaving this one size fits all box that isn't working for you for a reason. So it's that reminder and that need to have that why statement that we've talked about before, like, why isn't it working for you? And a reminder to not just replicate that thing at home, right? So if you're going to get a box of 5th grade curriculum, the odds that it's going to fit your kids are like slim to none, right? If you are going to use an online platform, it will do a better job of assessing your kids in a lot of cases and putting them at the levels that they need for them to have a more customized education. But is it really kind of an enthralling, enriching learning experience if that's their sole or even just like the majority of their education, right? So I think it's kind of just a great thing. And listen, if that's what you have available to you and that's how many spoons you have and that's what your battery allows and that's what your finances, do it. Do it. Like 100%. Do what you can. You're doing the best you can for your kids, all of that. And then as you evolve and as you grow in the world of homeschooling, there might be opportunities to kind of pull in some external things, right? But if you have a little bit more bandwidth from the start, there's opportunities to see where you might jump in.
Yeah. No, for sure. I totally agree with all of that. Again, I read this and I had similar ideas and comments. My thing was like, it talks about the fact that curriculum, it's based on, a generalization, right? A broad average. And we understand that when you average or make generalizations, the chances of there being a single person who is exactly the average, like it's not right? That's not how averages work. It's people who are kind of in a range that kind of fall within the median kind, it's all of this. It's not one specific thing, but somehow when we get to school stuff and school standards, we suddenly think like, okay, well, they all should be exactly like this and they should know this one thing. And it's just not true. It's not like that. My sister-in-law works tangentially with public schools, and she always talks about the fact that we spend so much time focusing on trying to get IEPs for the kids who need help, when in reality, every student in school, every kid who's going to learn at all should have an IEP, because there's not a single kid out there who learns exactly the same way as someone else in every single subject and every single thing. And just remembering that and being aware of the fact that you can make that work for you in lots of different ways. Even if you are looking at state standards, even if you do care about the state standards and you decide you're going to follow them, the way that you follow them, the way that you introduce it, the way that you make sure you cover them, it gets to look the way that works in your family and for each of your individual learners.
I've talked about, like, in a dream society, we did our episode on kindergarten that, called What the Fuck Did We Do to Kindergarten, right? Where we looked at, like, why are we expecting what we're expecting from 5-year-olds, right? But I was like, imagine if we took that year and made that entire year a broad scope IEP, basically, right? Where the kids come into school and they're learning organically and they're playing, and there's a team that's working with this group of kids, right? Not just one teacher who's spread way too thin and ridiculously overwhelmed. And, they're looking at how these kids learn best, and they're looking at their personalities, and they're looking at all of this to kind of create a pathway for them that suits them going forward, instead of expecting them to read by the time they're 6, I mean, that's very pie in the sky. I completely understand we're not doing that, but wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, that's it. We could sit here and brainstorm about what that would look like all day. I have so many great ideas around that, but we'll stick with the book club. Okay. I'm like, I want to go off on that tangent. All right. I'm going to make myself circle back. So page 81, the next page.
Yeah.
So this section is titled Faith-Based Homeschool Plans. And I just want to start by reiterating the fact that we are a secular podcast. And so the first thing that she brings up is faith-based homeschool plans. So we'll mention it, right? We'll talk about it a little because I can talk about it. I'm going to put it out there. We don't church, right? We don't church in any way, shape, or form. You are welcome to whatever religious beliefs you have. I don't have them, other than the fact that I really want to. My religious beliefs are that I want to not have religious beliefs.
I'm holding tight to that belief system.
Yep.
I did like the fact that at least her faith-based section included a wide range of faiths, right? Because I feel like in the homeschool community, there's a kind of a Christo-normative, environment, right? Like there's an automatic assumption of Christianity when we talk about faith in the homeschool community in so many ways. And she has things in here about Judaism and Buddhism and Muslim faith and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, okay, all right. Like, I like it. And I feel like now, and I think you noted in your notes, Amanda, like you didn't go into all of these resources because you're not a faith-based homeschooler. Neither am I. I'm not a faith-based homeschooler either. But I feel like this is the start of it. And then there's a whole slew of things afterwards in this section or in these chapters where she gives resources. I mean, it's like resource. And I feel like if you were trying to potentially work world religions in, some of these might be worth exploring. You might get to them and realize that they're there's way too much proselytizing going on or whatever. We didn't dig into them in that way, but they might be good resources to acknowledge that are there.
Yeah.
If that's your jam.
Exactly. That's it. And, so in each of these sections that we're going to go into, she talks about ideas to think about, best practices, and resources. So under this one, where it's faith-based homeschooling, she lists some best practices of how to more fully and meaningfully incorporate that into your homeschooling. Things like using, one of the big things was doing it yourself, right? So, and we've talked about that in a lot of things. If you want your kids to enjoy reading, you have to sit around and enjoy reading so that they see that and you have to model that. And she talks about doing that. She talks about possibly using holy text for memorization practice and copy work, not just for reading. Talks about walking the walk, not just doing the reading of it. So maybe that looks like more volunteering and community service and involvement that way. And then she also talks about the importance of exploring different faiths and cultures. And to that end, like Megan said, she lists resources and they run the gamut, really. There's, like Megan said again, it starts with a resource for Muslim homeschoolers. You've got Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, and Universalist home learners. So, check them out, whether you're doing faith-based learning and you're like, oh, maybe that's a new resource I haven't heard of. Or if you're like, well, we want to do a little bit more with world religions. Like I said, we don't church, but we do definitely learn about world religions and talk about different things. I think that's a really important part of education. It's there. It's an option.
Mm-hmm. And so she does those sections for each of these kind of categories. So next up is multicultural and multilingual homeschool plans. So you kind of outlined that, Amanda.
Yeah. So I think this section was mostly talking about people who are using this to highlight their native culture and language when it varies from where they live. But she does also kind of loop world schooling and traveling into it, which I thought for me, it was a little awkward. I guess I'm not sure exactly where else she put it in here either. So, okay, whatever.
Well, in chapter 9, she covers like 4 separate subjects. So she could have just added it to chapter 9,
Just stuck it in there. Like,
add a 5th one.
Yeah. Chapter 9 is my catch-all that I wasn't sure what to do. And that's why it's 50 pages. Okay, so yeah, for the multicultural and multilingual homeschool plans, she talks about, best practices, making sure that you're doing cultural festivals and cultural centers. I know we personally use a lot of unit study type things around that kind of stuff when we're doing that, because we are also a multiracial, multicultural home. It's a little more challenging for me because I'm of the dominant culture, right, where we live. And so a little harder to reach out and figure out those things. But these kinds of things do matter and work for us. Talks about going to museums, both in person and virtually. There are so many virtual options nowadays, especially post-COVID. So definitely use those. And then she mentions the traveling and world schooling and also highlights the importance of cooking, right? Whether it's learning the recipes or just sitting with older relatives as they cook, and that exchanging and sharing of culture at just a really basic fundamental level. For resources, she mentions Project World School. This was actually new to me. I didn't know of this one. They have essentially teen travel camps. They're not affordable, but they're not terribly expensive either. So if that's something that interests you, it might be worth looking into. There are also loads of other options out there. Lots of organizations and ways for your teen to travel, or you can do world schooling where you travel as a family. Mm-hmm. There's world schooling hubs, all kinds of things like that. One thing that I did like about Project World School, which she included as a resource, was that they have weekly virtual social hours, and it starts for tweens. It started at age 10, and there's 2 different groups, the tweens and then the teens. They get together online. So I thought that was an interesting option. Then she runs through some other books and blogs. Did any of them spark your interest? Most of them did not really spark my interest, so I didn't dive too much into those.
Not really, no. Like she uses Duolingo as the language app, and like all I see are the videos on Instagram where people have like, if people spoke like they did in Duolingo, right? And I'm not picking on Duolingo truly, because we have the pro subscription to Duolingo. One of my kids wanted it, and if you have the pro thing, you can join teams, and so she's on a team with her best friend. They're not even learning the same language, but they're on a team, so I'm not really sure how that works, but I'm like, whatever, have fun. And so, but like, it constantly asks her, like, is your cat a sandwich, right? Like, it's not, she's getting vocabulary, but the conversation is weird. And so if you go online, sometimes there's people who say like, if the world was Duolingo and they'll walk up to people on the street and say things like, is your cat a sandwich? And then, like, because it's not, apparently there's better language programs, but she's on it with her bestie and she loves it. And so I'm like, have fun, and her vocabulary is doing quite well with French. Her pronunciation is doing really well because you have to speak into Duolingo and it tells you if it doesn't recognize what you said, you just don't get credit for it and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, there's probably better programs. But the one thing that stood out for me in this section was in the best practices, which you ran through as far as like going to museums and cultural festivals and cooking with grandma and things like that, right? It's September, it's the beginning of the quote unquote school year for a lot of people. And there's a parent in my local group who's new to homeschooling and she's super eager and super excited and she's just jumping in and like, I'm so happy for them because they're going to have such an awesome journey ahead of them, But she posts all the time, like, can this count to school? Can this count to school? And I'm like, I get it. You're new and you don't know where the boundaries are and you don't know what counts as learning, what doesn't count as learning. I live in a state where nobody's checking on your what counts as learning, right? Like nobody, this is not New York. So, and so it's so funny because I keep answering, I'm like, it all counts. Like if your child is enriched and thriving and growing and all, and she's got a peanut, the kid's like 8. We're not talking college. We're not talking high school transcripts here, right? Like, so, I liked the fact that this was all in here as learning, right? These are things that are enriching. If our goal when we talk about growth and we kind of measure growth is like, at the end of the day, can you say, I finished this day ahead of where I started the day, right? Did you grow as a person? Did you do something meaningful? And that's not to say all day, every day needs to be jam-packed. If you woke up that day and you listened to your body and took a lazy day, that's also growth, right? Because you're resting and you're growing as an individual as far as your mind-body connection and your self-care and things like that. So it's not to say all day, every day needs to be jam-packed, but these are things. Going to a museum. Did your kid grow from a museum? Of course they did.
I sure hope so, right?
Exactly, yeah. Right? Did your kid grow from travel? Did your kid grow from, yes, they're developing, they're growing, they're expanding their horizons, they'll have stories to tell, like all of this stuff. So I just like the fact that she kind of circles those things, and that those things, if you're in the camp where you're new and you're still going, does this quote unquote count as school? The answer is almost always yes, if you want it to be, unless you live in a super strict state where you're going to have to get a little more clever about how you write that, but it still probably counts as school, but most things, especially when they're younger like that, oh my gosh, if they're learning and growing and developing, and I mean, if you're going grocery shopping and they're helping pick out a new recipe they want to make that week and helping make the list and, all that kind of stuff, and they're, at the store, oh my gosh, I talked about the fact that my 2 oldest teens will go to the store sometimes. My oldest drives and my daughter's better at finding the stuff in the store. So I'll give her the list. She goes in, she finds the stuff, and then that's it, right? She comes home one day. We had asked for a box of Cheerios. It was on the list. She comes home one day with a box of Cheerios, Amanda, that was like the size of a juice box. I swear there were like 4 Cheerios in it. And I was like, oh, you got you. Okay. Look, I didn't say anything. I broke the price down per ounce. They make it really, really tricky, but I figured it out. And these were the cheapest Cheerios. And I was like, I was so proud of her, but I was like, that's great. There's a bowl of Cheerios in here. But I'm like, this is learning. This is growth. This is real life skills. So does going to the supermarket count? In some ways, yes. Depends on, what your experience is like. But, yes, it counts. So don't stress. Right? Yeah, it's not just bookwork. It's not sitting at a table, memorizing things, writing things, doing workbook pages. Way more than that, quote unquote, counts.
It's true. And I would go even a step further than that, especially for the younger kids. It's so easy to say that a play date doesn't count.
Right.
But one, it could be your PE, depending on what they were doing. Were they somewhere where they were doing climbing and things like that? That's, physical coordination. But 2, these days, social emotional learning is so big, and you can do a social emotional class, but you can also go on a play date and make sure that your kid is navigating these actual real interpersonal relationships and practicing how to listen and how to share and, all of these kind of things that counts. That's a skill that they need to learn. It's something that they would dedicate class time to in a brick and mortar school. So, yeah.
Yeah. My kids like to, when they were younger, especially, they would make up games at the playground, right?
Mm.
And there'd be rules and there'd be a scoring system and they would rope other kids in and they would teach the other kids how to play, right? The power of imagination and creativity in that is so tremendous that I'm like, yes, absolutely. Play is amazing, an amazing source of learning.
Yeah.
So I like it.
All right. So the next one is on page 89 and it's homeschool plans for special needs.
I have
She
a lot
kicks
of
this
notes here.
one. Yeah. Okay.
Like in my book.
I did not have as many, right? So you can carry this one a bit more. So my first thing was she has a quote. It says in 2015, approximately 12% of the population of homeschoolers chose homeschooling because of their child's special needs, including physical or mental health needs. And I thought that was interesting. And I also am really curious, right? In 2015, so we're talking almost 10 years later. And I just feel like with the division these days, from everything from the SEL that we were just talking about to gender identity to how to teach history, I would guess that the mental health aspect is propelling growth pretty rapidly around a lot of those things. I mean, especially if you have a kiddo who is non-gender conforming, you might not say that you've pulled your kid for mental health reasons, but I think that's probably pretty, it's there in your head and you're like, well, it's better, especially depending on where you're at school. I mean, if you're
Oh,
at
yeah.
school in Louisiana or Alabama or some nonsense kind of thing, and like, I just don't want to be there. I don't want to see that happening. Like, I would just bet with the way the political climate and environment currently that there's a lot more of that.
Well, and I think in the last almost 10 years, like you pointed out too, we've gotten far better at diagnosing neurodivergence as well, where, especially in girls, where all of a sudden we're like, oh, girls have ADHD. Get out of town.
Yeah.
Who knew? Does it show the exact same way it does in boys? No. Oh, right. It's like, oh my gosh, we're figuring out that, girls are different in different ways, and identifying that there are plenty of autistic girls out there, but it might not look the same way as it does in boys. And we've been neglecting them for decades, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're
so
starting
much
to
of that.
Yes, I mean, I follow so many women on social media who are getting diagnosed with ADHD and autism in 30s, 40s, etc. And it's like, then there's this thought process like, oh, everybody's neurodivergent now. No, everybody always was. There's always been this huge percentage of neurodivergence. We were just ignoring it, incapable of identifying it, choosing not to identify and choosing not to support it, choosing not to label it, right? All of this that was out there. And so I wish that we've talked about this before, but I wish she would cite her sources actually in the reading, because I want to know where this stat came from, because I would love to go to whatever website that was or whatever study it was or whatever to see if they've redone it now all these years on. But since she doesn't do that, it's like,
yeah, this one might be worth actually emailing her or reaching out to her and trying to find out where she got it from so we could update that and talk about it. Because you're absolutely right. I personally know, moms who are struggling with this, the daughters who have been told, like, no, no. And the moms are like, yeah. Like, let me show you the research on it. Let me show you what it looks like. Like, take this seriously. And then I would say a step further, and you might be a little bit more removed from this because it's been a while since you've done an IEP process, but I know that with the IEP process, a lot of kids these days are being identified as having anxiety, and they're being identified as having significant anxiety. But then the IEP process says, but it's not yet impacting their ability to do their schoolwork. So we're not going to do anything about it. Like, they're not failing yet because of it. So we're not going to do anything about it. Like, again, why do we have to get to the point where they're failing and it's crisis level before we'll do anything about it? Come on. Come on.
And you talked about a couple of episodes ago, you talked about, how the fact that like you have chronic illness and that informs everything that you do as a person who's an anxious fucking human being. Yeah, right. Like there's nothing that it's not going to affect. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. Right. And so that's such BS. Like that is such BS, right? That it's like, it's affecting you all the time. in some way, shape, or form because it's a roller coaster, you know? So yeah, that's total
Yeah.
crap. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to email her. I'm going out of town this weekend. I'm going to have a little hotel time. I'm going to have a little Netflix time. I'm going to watch Meet Some Emily in Paris, and I'll send her an email.
Nice.
So I got to make a note of it because if I
Nice.
don't, okay. Sharpie note in the book. It's good. I'll send her an email. Okay. Now, I had made a note further down on page 89 that also ties into something that I highlighted on 90. So, in her ideas to think about, she says homeschooling parents do not need to go it alone. Many school districts will assist with supplemental services and support. To receive these services, your child must be registered in your school district. So if your child needs a special reading program, your district can help. That might be true if you live in one of the handful of states that's somewhat doing public education well in the United States, but many of them are not. So go to page 90, and she talks about if you're considering homeschooling your child with special needs, most likely the schooling provided to them is not allowing them to thrive. And so it's like I feel like she's talking out of both sides of her mouth there a little bit, where she's like, if the public school system can't support your child's needs, that's probably why you're going to bring them home. But on the other side, she's like, but you might be able to rely on them for help. And I'm like, if they could help the kid, they would have, or if they had the resources or they had the knowledge or they had the tools or whatever. So it might be possible, depending on where you live, if you have some amazing school system and, maybe it's possible, right? But I think if you are in a school system that's already doing a really lousy job at supporting special needs kids, the odds that you're going to get even more support once the school system isn't getting their public funding for your learner might not necessarily be epic. So it's worth exploring, but I wouldn't cross my fingers and toes that it's actually going to happen. Right?
Yeah, I guess that's what I would say, right?
Yeah.
Services can be very expensive. If you have a kiddo who clearly needs OT, by all means, see if you can get it through your public school, because there's a chance, right, that you will get some OT services. Is it going to be everything you need? Probably not. Is it going to be exactly what you need? Probably not. But if you can get a foundation of free OT through the school and save that hundreds of dollars at the very beginning, go for it. I'm all for using the resources that are available.
Yep.
Don't count on them being able to do everything that you need, but it doesn't hurt to look into what your options are and what you can get. I know we looked into it. It went absolutely nowhere. It wasn't worth it. And we're fortunate enough to be able to be like, okay, fine. We can't get it for free. We'll get what we need and we'll pay for it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you cry to them because you don't know what they're talking about and you ask them to help and they say, Google it. Yeah. There's an OutSchool class for that. Thank you. That was so helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of my takeaway from that section. She does, like every other section, list some resources. She's got this, so neither of us have dyslexic learners, but this Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, I was not familiar with that. Has that entered your scope at all? Like hearing about it from other people?
No, that was new to me. I did not know of that one. I did know of understood.org. I have used that and it has some useful things on it. For best practices, she talked about making sure you research and really educate yourself on your child's specific disability. And I think that's hugely important. She talks about the importance of learning the basics of differentiation and finding a support group. I think all of those things are so important. Support group. Facebook is great for that, but there are other options too. You might be able to find something local. Those things are all important. And then, she has just some different ones. I didn't agree with all of the ones that she had listed in here. No. But again, she's not purely progressive or purely secular, and you can see that in her resources. One that I will say that she did not include that I think she really should have is A Day in Our Shoes. So if you're not familiar, A Day in Our Shoes is a great resource if you have a kiddo with special needs of any sort or any sort of learning disability. It is definitely geared towards the IEP process in public schools. I won't mince words on that. But it has loads and loads of ideas and suggestions for modifications and accommodations and things to ask for when you're going through that public school IEP process. And a lot of those are really great things that you can try out at home, good for brainstorming and kind of getting your juices flowing for things that you're going to do in your own home to help your kiddo. So a great resource, lots of stuff that's free. There's some paid stuff that's also very affordable. I think it's a top resource.
I like it. We've got gifted learning, which I'm excited. FYI, in season 2, Amanda is going to do a whole episode on gifted, which I'm pumped about. Is this news to you? I feel like we talked about this.
No, I'm making faces over the title. I did not like this section, but yes,
yeah.
a better dive into gifted learning, I think would be great.
Yes, exactly. So we've already got that scheduled for next year. Amanda and I both have gifted learners, and I think my own experience, Amanda, you can speak to your own, but I feel like society and especially the public school system has truly bastardized the word gifted, right? That so many people don't even understand what it means now. Like that it's truly, it's a neurodivergence. It's not just that your kid picks things up quickly or that, you know, your kid is a little bit ahead in grade level or something. Like that's truly not what gifted is. Okay. It's misused all the time. And I think those of us who have truly gifted kids, I wrote in the margins in my book here, rarely is a child, quote unquote, just gifted, right? It's very common for a kid to be gifted, but also have other forms of neurodivergence, learning disabilities, learning differences, things like that. And I think it's interesting because the path of parenting a gifted child is often quite challenging. And for all the people that are like, my child is gifted, right? And I'm like, I think if you maybe actually had a gifted kid, you wouldn't be like, this is the best thing ever, because it's a journey unto itself. It is peaks and valleys.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would be careful about saying they all have something else going on. There's a significant percentage of gifted kids who are gifted and fairly neurotypical on kind of all the other scales, right? But you are also correct in that, like, gifted does often also come with a whole lot of other things. In this specific chapter for me, it's called Homeschool Plans for Gifted and High Achieving Students. And my big thing that I feel like a lot of people don't understand is that gifted and high achieving are not the same thing.
Nope.
Right? It's essentially a Venn diagram. And there's like a bit of overlap where you have a gifted kid who is a high achieving student. And you might have a high achieving student who is a gifted kid. But they are not the same. And dealing with them or approaching their educational plan in the same way is ill-advised, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll leave it at that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Be aware of that they are not the same thing.
She does have, and I didn't have a chance to look it up on Amazon because, as I have previously mentioned, I didn't sleep a lot last night and wrote my notes very late before our episode today. But she does list in her resource Cindy West's book, Homeschooling Gifted Kids, A Practical Guide to Educate and Motivate Advanced Learners. Is that on your radar at all, Amanda? Have you ever?
You know, I hadn't seen that one. I have a lot of books on gifting, on gifted kids and homeschooling gifted kids. I will say I bought it to read it, to see what I thought about it. It's already on the way. But that was a new one to me. And she did not list any of my favorite ones, which I thought was pretty interesting. She didn't mention any of the people that like are pretty big and influential in actual gifted.
In the gifted circles.
Yeah, in the gifted circles, which made me think that, you know, given her teaching background, she probably doesn't seem to have a great grasp on the difference between high achieving and gifted. I will say, you know, she has best practices and, you know, she talks about allow your child choice. I think that's really important. Integrate art, music, and theater. A lot of gifted kids are, you know, really hungry for all of those kinds of things. She talks about dual and concurrent enrollment. That said, she says it starts when they're 11th grade and up, which if you've got a gifted kiddo,
Yeah.
You're not waiting until 11th grade to be looking
No.
at dual and concurrent enrollment options.
Do you know what's funny? Okay, because I read quickly. I read that as age 11, not
Oh,
grade 11, because in the gifted world, that's where my brain went. That's more accurate,
oh
right?
yeah,
You know, and so
yeah,
I was like, when you just said that, I was like, oh, it said grade. Oh, okay. Which is
yeah.
why it didn't jump out at me.
Right, exactly. My kiddo's public school oversight teacher just at our most recent social was like, have you been thinking about doing any of the college classes? Like, I know he did a high school science class last year. Were you thinking about moving into college classes? And I was like, but he's only 10. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Like, it's a different world.
Yeah.
That said, a high achieving kid, totally normal for a high achieving kid at 11th grade to be like, yeah, I'm ready to start doing those high school classes. That's like perfectly normal. So, just that difference, right? And then she also says, don't forget the social, emotional, and physical needs of gifted kids. And I think there's a lot of truth to that as well, right? Gifted kids, they love to learn, they love to absorb whatever it is, whatever their thing is. And so, yeah, you have to remember to teach some of those other things, or to encourage them to get outside and do sports, or go for hikes or walks, or ride their bike, or whatever that kind of thing is, instead of just always being a bookworm. There's nothing wrong with being a bookworm, but getting outside and blowing off the stink is also a good thing.
Yeah.
As my grandma would say, right?
I have one where I deal with that all the time, where it's like, but why do I need to make friends and deal with other humans? They don't understand me. They don't like the things that I like. And I'm like, well, sometimes you can just go play board games with other teenagers, and that's okay too, right? And it's like, but if they can't find that like deep, meaningful connection related to what it's a challenge, right? It's not the same thing. So yeah, I liked that.
For sure. And so, yeah, we kind of touched on the resources. One that I will say, the Hoagie's education page that she talks about, it's an okay place. It's got loads of links. It's loads and loads and loads of information, links to articles and other programs and online things for gifted kids. It has a ton of information, but it is also, I think it's defunct for the most part, and the website itself hasn't been updated. I didn't see anything that had been updated since 2020. And I remember around that time people talking about the fact that they had maybe shut down that program or something like that. So the website itself still has a lot of great information and links to a lot of other great resources, but just know that it's aging and you're not going to find the most current stuff there anymore.
Yeah, so I'm excited to hear more about gifted. We've taken different paths in the gifted community. Amanda and I, where Amanda's a researcher, loves to research. I love to research too, but in different ways. Like, I don't know that I necessarily go in the same direction as you, and we haven't schooled traditionally. So I haven't needed to think about how traditional education looks for a profoundly gifted child or anything like that, right? I've just been like, you love to learn? Go have fun, be free, right? So I'm excited to hear your perspective on it, since you've gone deeper in different ways than I have. So that'll be, I think, a more meaningful conversation about gifted learning when we get to it in season 2, right? Which I can't even believe we're talking about. But we are. It's exciting. All right. So we started out by saying we were going to talk about 7, 8, and as much of 9 as we possibly could. And look at that. We're out of time. And we're just now getting to chapter 9. So chapter 9 will be next week. We come in with the best laid plans, and then we do what we do.
So I will say, right, chapters 10 and 11 are both like 3 pages each. So we should be able to just make it happen, 9, 10, 11, and still stay generally on schedule with wrapping up the book at the right time. I think we'll be all right.
There you go. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Homeschooling is all about flexibility. And so we set out with great goals, and then we flex, and we still get everything done in the end. But we flex and we get there when we get there. So you're along the ride with us. If you're new to homeschooling, we're a great lesson in flexing. So if you are not a member of our Patreon account, we would love to invite you to come and hang out with us over there as well. We provide a themed unit study every month. It's a great way to be able to expand your horizons. We talked earlier in this episode about kind of a one-size-fits-all education or an online education. And if that's what you have in your toolkit right now and that's what's working for you, that's awesome. But this might be just like one little tool to add in that can branch out from there, that can take a multidisciplinary approach, take a hands-on approach in different ways than you're currently doing right now. It can be tough to build a unit study from the perspective that you have to kind of go in and pre-watch the movies sometimes, or pre-read the books or something like that. And so I think sometimes that's what stops people from doing them, or you just don't like them,
Yeah.
like Amanda, and that's okay too.
Mhm.
Also okay. But if you've not tried before, or you're looking for a new way to kind of introduce something like that, come on over. It's there. The resources have been vetted. Like for the September one, there's a movie recommendation in there. And then I went in and recorded like a 5-minute parent preview of the movie. So I told you if there was any language, if there was any that like the scenes where you might have to like cover eyeballs for like a younger child, or a sensitive child or something like that. And it really is age appropriate in just about every way. But depending, every kid is different, right? I mentioned that we went to see Jane Goodall last night, and I have an empath, and so I kept looking over to my right. He was like a seat over, because she was talking about like chimps being used in labs for medical testing and stuff, and I was like, oh, and so I kept looking over. So if you have that kid, you might just need to know when those points are, and so I've got that for you, right? We host 2 live meetings a month. One's a Q&A with us, where we come and answer all of your personalized homeschool questions. So if it's something we haven't talked about on the podcast, or that's really specific to your family or your kiddo, come, we'll be happy to help. And then we host a happy hour. So if you're looking to meet some other homeschool mom friends and come and have fun and let loose and all that, we have a mutual friend, Amanda and I, who tells her kids, whenever we just have a mom's night out thing on Zoom, tells her kids that it's a book club meeting. So FYI, that totally works. Your kids won't interrupt you because it's book club. So you could always do that too. I'm just saying. So come and join us if you're looking to build homeschool community. We would love to have you. The link is in our podcast description. It's in our social bios. You can DM us, whatever, but we would love to welcome you. And it's between $7 and $12 a month, depending on which route you decide to take to join. So our goal was to keep it affordable for just about anybody who wanted to join. So come and hang out with us. So yeah, next week, chapters 9, 10, and 11. We're getting there. Our book after that, which I think I misspoke in last week's book club episode, by the way. I thought we only had one more week left. And so I was like, coming up next, but we're getting there. We'll get there eventually, right? Is The Danish Way of Raising Teens. And there's also a link in our descriptions for that. So if you do like to come and read the books with us, it's there. So feel free to purchase it. Sometimes when we share links, they're affiliate links. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use our affiliate links, but it does just give us like a little brownie point on Amazon that helps fund our podcast. And we appreciate you and thank you. So tune in for the continuation of our book next week. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling, friends.
Have a great one.